You're watching Headlines Today. I'm Maha Siddiqui. The verdict in the IPL betting and fixing case is out. That's the big story at the moment. The Apex Court has made it clear that Gurunath, Meiyappan and Kundra were team officials and both of them were involved in betting during IPL 2013. The Supreme Court has said that the BCCI functions as a public body and is open to judicial review. In its 130-page verdict, the BCCI's functions are amenable to Article 226 is what the Supreme Court had to say. Let's quickly give you point by point facts that are coming out of the Supreme Court's order. First of all, a 3-judge committee has been formed that's going to decide on the quantum of punishment for Gurunath, Meiyappan and Kundra, and also going to decide the fate of CSK and Rajasthan Royals. Now 6.2.4 has been scrapped. The Supreme Court has settled the issue of conflict of interest. AC Muthaiya, former BCCI president, is now joining us on the phone line. Sir, first of all, how do you read this order? Srinivasan stopped from contesting BCCI elections, and Supreme Court also very clearly saying that settling rather the conflict of interest that we were seeing earlier on in IPL and BCCI.
Sorry? Hello,
Mr. Muthaiya, are you there with us?
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, we wanted to know your first reactions to what the Supreme Court has said in its order today. First of all, stopping N. Srinivasan from contesting the BCCI elections.
I can only say this is a landmark judgment and I'm very, very happy about the judgment. This will change the face of cricket, and I feel that very strongly. I feel that I have been vindicated. I've been fighting this case for the last 6 years. It's really a fantastic judgment.
Sir, go ahead.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to know is that, do you feel that the Supreme Court has wrapped the BCCI here and shown complete no faith in the BCCI, if I can put it like that, since they have made a 3-judge committee over there that's going to decide the quantum of punishment and also the fate of CSK and RR, leaving nothing for the BCCI for the moment?
Yeah, that's the right thing to do. Sorry, I was not following you.
Mr. Muthaiya, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, tell me.
All right. Mr. Muthaiya, I was asking you as to how you view the fact that the court has formed a 3-judge committee that's going to decide the quantum of punishment and the fate of CSK and RR, leaving nothing for the BCCI over here.
I don't want to speculate. A body of eminent judges have been appointed and they will decide in the best interest of the game. So I don't wish to speculate on that.
All right. Boria Majumdar wants to speak with Mr. Muthaiya. Boria, go ahead.
Mr. Muthaiya, how do you see this panning out from here on for the board? With Mr. Srinivasan not eligible to contest, do you see Mr. Srinivasan's position in the ICC also coming under cloud?
It should come under the case. Definitely he should walk out of ICC now, because he is nobody in the board, and the Supreme Court has given a decision that he cannot contest, and it is very embarrassing for anyone to be on the ICC board when he has been condemned by the Supreme Court of India itself. So he should honorably now quit the ICC. Yeah, tell me, Puria.
So, second question. You have been a former TNCA president, and Mr. Srinivasan is the current TNCA president. My question is, now that the Supreme Court has struck down 6.2.4, how do you see this impacting TNCA? If he continues to own Chennai Super Kings, he can't be TNCA president, and vice versa. How do you see this impacting IPL, Chennai Super Kings and TNCA?
He should come out of TNCA. He should come out of ICC, because here again there is a conflict of interest. He cannot be in CSK and in TNCA board.
Third and final question, sir. The Supreme Court has appointed a 3-judge committee to deliberate upon the future of these franchises. And all judges, former Supreme Court judges, clearly tells you that the court has very little faith on the BCCI. As a former president, are you disappointed?
No, I'm very happy with the decision.
All right, that was former BCCI President A.C. Muthaiya there saying that he's happy with the judgment, that he's been fighting for it for a very long time. Also expressing gladness over the fact that a 3-judge committee has been formed to look into the quantum of punishment and the fate of CSK and RR, leaving nothing there for the BCCI. In fact, he also says that Srinivasan should step. All right, we have with us Justice Mudgal there on the phone line. Justice Mudgal, first of all, how do you react to the Supreme Court order today?
Look, nobody has to react to it. You have to accept the order of the Supreme Court, frankly. Anyway, it's an advancement in the field of public law, particularly that relating to sports body and their administration. And it will definitely bring a lot of fairness into their functioning. So constitutionally, it's an...
Sir, hi, this is Boria Majumdar.
Yes, Boria.
Sir, if you can hear me, do you think this will introduce probity and fairness in the workings of the BCCI? That this is a landmark judgment which will bring probity and transparency, finally?
It's a landmark judgment not only in the field of sports law, but also in the field of constitutional law, and will eventually extend to, if I have heard it correctly, to all public bodies. All right? This conflict of interest doesn't occur in sports alone.
The second question is...
Yes.
So the 3-judge committee that the Supreme Court has appointed, all former Supreme Court judges.
Yes.
This clearly is against everything that the BCCI wanted. What do you think, does this sort of symbolize for the future of the BCCI?
Well, I think it's a one-time measure, and obviously it symbolizes that there should be fairness in functioning. Hello?
Yes, sir. Go on. Yes, hello? I can hear you.
Yeah, there should be fairness in functioning of all public bodies, and though it is given in the context of sports law, and I think the two honorable judges, Justice Thakur and Justice Kalifullah, deserve kudos and compliments for advancing constitutional and administrative law.
You yourself, sir, you've been deliberating and investigating this case for the longest time. 2 reports, February and then subsequently in November. Do you sort of feel vindicated in a sense that at least the effort that you put in to try and get to the root of the problem finally has sort of shown light in terms of transparency?
Well, the committee only feels vindicated that the Honorable Supreme Court has chosen to accept most of its finding, and that is a very gratifying thing. All right, I mean, beyond that, we had
no final question. In all of this, all of this, that envelope with 13 names, 9 names that of players haven't yet come out. What is your stand? If there are misdemeanors there, don't you think those names also should come out in the public domain? And everything should be cleansed once and for all?
Look, I honestly believe that if the Honorable Supreme Court has not said anything about, there must be very compelling reasons, and therefore I wouldn't want to say anything at all about that. Okay. Hello?
Justice Mudgal, many thanks for speaking with Headlines today. There, Justice Mudgal speaking exclusively with Headlines today. Let me go back to Shivani Gupta, who's outside the Supreme Court. Shivani seems to have some more information over there. Shivani, go ahead.
Well, I actually just wanted to pose a question to Justice Mudgal about whether this also means that the BCCI is now open to RTI. Of course, he's a former Chief Justice of a state, and perhaps he could have answered that question. But in all indications, as he was saying, that this is a landmark judgment, and it will open up, new areas, not just in the field of sports, but overall as well. So in that regard, the question of whether the BCCI can come under RTI now, whether its finances can come under RTI now, is going to be one of the biggest ramifications of this judgment today, Maha.
Shivani, if you can give us some more clarity on what the 3-judge panel there has been asked to do apart from deciding the quantum of punishment and the fate of CSK and RR?
What they've been actually appointed to do is formulate strategies and the way forward for the BCCI. And very importantly, what the Supreme Court has said is that BCCI officials and franchises are going to be bound by the recommendations of whatever this committee says. So it is no longer just quote-unquote recommendations, but it's going to be binding on officials and on franchises. In other ways, whatever this committee decides now is going to be the final action on Rajasthan Royals, on Chennai Super Kings, on Meiyappan, on Raj Kundra, and it is going to further look into Sundar Raman's role as well, all the main protagonists. And they are going to make recommendations now on what should happen to make the BCCI a stronger body as far as all the angles of corruption, of transparency, and of administration go. These are the things that they have been asked to work on. But importantly, not just recommendations, they're going to be binding whatever the committee says on officials and franchises.
All right, so whatever the committee says, that's the 3-judge committee there, will be binding on the BCCI. Boria, you were putting up one question to Justice Mudgal about the court showing very little faith in the BCCI by appointing that 3-judge committee. Do you think that's the hardest rap that could have come to the BCCI in this case?
I think the BCCI had enough opportunities to get their house in order. I think the Supreme Court gave them enough indications, enough hearings happened, observations kept coming. I think the BCCI missed the bus. I mean, every time the Supreme Court gave an opportunity, the BCCI came back and said, we stand behind Srinivasan, we stand behind Sundar Raman, we don't think there's a problem. So the BCCI missed the bus there. The point that Shivani was making about RTI, Justice Mudgal has already recommended BCCI should come under RTI in the National Sports Code. So Justice Mudgal's stand on that is well known. I think the BCCI today stands a discredited body, Maha. The fact that a 3-member judge committee, their recommendations are bound, their recommendations are sacrosanct, means the BCCI has no room to maneuver. I think the Supreme Court kept telling us that ultimately fans' faith is paramount. The BCCI needs to restore fans' credibility. They did not do that. Today they stand a discredited body. The fact that no Srinivasan can contest, the fact that Chennai and Rajasthan's fate no longer will be decided by the BCCI comes as a real slap on the face of the BCCI. But I think they are responsible for it. They themselves did not get their house in order. They were too complacent, thinking they're a private body and nobody can touch them for the longest time.
Vinay wants to make a point over here.
Maha, I was just trying to explain the question that you asked Shivani, and I think that was a very important question, because that question pretty much lays out what's in store for the future insofar as Indian cricket is concerned. I think it's very important to explain that. It's important for viewers to know the formation of BCCI has been done under a Societies Act. The Societies Act works a little bit like, to put it very loosely, like an RWA.
Okay.
An RWA in any city is authorized and empowered to come up with its own rules, which all the members believe are good for the functioning. Of course, those rules have to be submitted to the registrar. The Societies Act allows for an MOU to be formed between members of society, and that MOU then determines the governing of the society. What the court has now said is that these 3 members, the Supreme Court judges, will decide on what those MOU conditions will be, which pretty much means that if there is any amendment required in those MOUs, they can be recommended by this committee and they will become full and final and binding, which means the very character, nature and the functioning of BCCI may well alter if the committee headed by Justice Lodha believes that this is not the way to do it. The other observation that they made, that they perform a public function, is an indicator of how this committee will work. Because now, unlike say a private body where you could make your own rules and decide what should be the way forward, this committee will definitely keep this aspect in mind, that they're performing a public function. So the very nature of the MOU's clauses will undergo a huge change from what we've seen so far in Indian cricket. And I think that's perhaps the most landmark part about this judgment, which is what Justice Mudgal was referring to, that it also settles down the role of certain societies if they're performing a public function.
So, Boria, then what is the future of the BCCI in a situation like this?
See, I don't think the BCCI's future in that sense, as a body, I mean, obviously they stand discredited. They'll have to now sort of do some soul searching, reconstitute themselves, because ultimately they are the arbiters of Indian cricket and will continue to be, as Justice Mudgal said, and I think he's right. This is a one-time measure to bring the BCCI into sort of in accordance with the rules, in accordance with public functioning, in accordance with fans' faith. I think this is a one-time thing. I think there is enough indication in this that the BCCI will have to restructure. Who becomes the new president? Who becomes the new functionaries? How they take Indian cricket forward? I do see there is a fundamental paradigm shift within the functioning of the BCCI. I think Srinivasan, who was at the helm of affairs for the last 5-6 years, he'll have to give way. I think there will be a change in the ICC as well. See, please don't make this mistake that, this is about Indian cricket. It's not about Indian cricket, it's about world cricket. Ultimately, India are the arbiters of the world game. It was Mr. Srinivasan's idea that resulted in a fundamental change within the nature and character of the ICC, despite some international boards initially opposing it. Now, what happens to Mr. Srinivasan's position there in the ICC will also come under question. So all said and done, too early to say what will happen to the board, but all we can definitely say is the cricket world has been fundamentally changed over the last couple of hours.
Shivani, you were pointing this out earlier, but what happens to the CSK in case N. Srinivasan decides to move out of the TNCA because there is a conflict of interest issue that has been settled by the Supreme Court today, and considering that this committee, the 3-judge committee, will now decide on the fate of CSK and RR, can the CSK perhaps be saved if N. Srinivasan decides to step out of CSK?
I think Srinivasan not being part of the BCCI is going to be on the premise on which CSK at all can take part in the IPL, because unless that happens, they cannot. Obviously, that has been made very clear now, because the very amendment that allowed Srinivasan to hold or own an IPL team has been scrapped now. So Srinivasan actually not being part of the BCCI, at least on that count, allows the CSK to go on as is, without its ownership being changed. Because otherwise, if Srinivasan wants to fight elections, he'll have to give up the ownership of Chennai Super Kings. As far as what action is taken on Chennai Super Kings and Rajasthan Royals, that will be in accordance with the IPL agreement. An 11.3 clause comes into play here, which clearly mentions that if any player, team official, part of an IPL team brings the game into disrepute, that contract can be terminated. But how seriously action they're going to take is something is difficult to speculate on, because they'll have to keep a lot of factors in mind. They'll have to keep in mind that there are other players involved. They'll have to keep in mind that the whole format in itself is going to fall. If two teams are going to be even suspended for 1 year, that is going to be a huge setback to the league. The schedule for the next season has already been announced. So, all that remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, that Srinivasan cannot fight elections, and that at least allows CSK to be part of the IPL structure as of now. Because if he at all decides that he wants the BCCI post and not an IPL team, which the Supreme Court has left to him in a way, then Chennai Super Kings will have to be sold to somebody else.
Vinay, there's a lot of money riding on the IPL. It's also hugely popular. As a brand, it's definitely going to take a beating if if the committee actually does decide that the CSK and RR should be chucked out of IPL for this year's tournaments. How do you see that also hitting the image of, say, cricket in India, in the world?
Listen, let me tell you something that was happening in the background. This was the union budget, which was being looked upon by the entire industry as perhaps the best budget that could have come, because every indices that the government looks for is positive. This was the reason why corporates were most hopeful that IPL would be a huge opportunity for them to do brand promotions, to invest a lot of money, and the revenue drivers for a lot of industries was possibly this tournament insofar as this year was concerned. Remember, Indian board's finances or the world cricket's finances are entirely driven by India. It's not just IPL alone. Indian board and the Indian cricket fuels and funds virtually the entire cricketing world across, right? In such a situation, when the Indian, and a lot of that was also possible because of the way the Indian board would work. There is not lack of transparency in some of the deals that are done, the way the tenders are allotted or the way they are rejected. There isn't enough transparency on that, and I think questions have been raised by people in the past, but because it suited everybody, not enough noise was made. With this order and the MOU being examined by a Supreme Court judge would mean that they will part to the tooth comb on every single clause, including financial clauses, and it definitely introduces a greater sense of propriety. the negativity that is currently attached to the tournament and to this cricket game in general will certainly scare off a few potential sponsors and potentially those who were willing to invest a lot of money in this year's IPL, because this was this one year which was supposed to be a feel-good year for a lot of people in the industry.